You are the ideal woman for sure. If I didn't have a wife, I'd want to marry you, Betty. It looked as though my husband, John, was proposing to our eldest son's wife, Betty, right there on the bed. You can't do that. Though Betty appeared to be resisting, she was also getting closer to John on her own accord. I was shocked to see this unfold on my live security camera. I couldn't believe John and Betty were embracing each other in our bedroom. I had always suspected something was going on between them because they seemed too close, but I never imagined I'd witness such a scene live. But then I thought to myself, I have clear evidence of their affair right here. So, why not expose this video in a big way? My name's Patricia Johnson, a 55-year-old housewife. Currently, I work part-time a few times a week. My husband, John, is the same age as me and an office worker. We are high school sweethearts. It's been 30 years since we got married. We barely talk anymore. Whenever I try to start a conversation, John just grunts a short reply. It feels like he doesn't even look at my face anymore. He watches TV and eats in silence during dinner. My only companion at home is our pet Shiba Inu, Carl. Carl is my cherished buddy. We have a son. Our eldest, Terry, is currently 28. Last year, he married a woman named Betty, who's a year younger than him, and they now live with us. Initially, I didn't expect to live with my son and his wife, but Terry said he wanted to stay at our home, so I agreed. It was mostly for financial reasons. While my son, Terry, has a steady job, it seems that lately, with overtime being restricted, his earnings aren't all that great. Considering the monthly rent, he mentioned wanting to save money by living at home for the time being. I was uncertain about living with my son's wife. However, even though it's just been the two of us, my relationship with John has been cold for a while. Maybe having others in the house might liven things up. Hoping for a better environment, I decided to move in with Terry and his wife. At first, after we all started living together, things were surprisingly smooth. Betty seemed to have a reserved personality, much like Terry. She was considerate, helping around the house, and was always pleasant to me. Things were going so well that I thought, living together might not be so bad after all. But after a while, things began to change. John and Betty seemed to be getting unusually close. While Betty isn't particularly skilled in household chores or cooking and often says she lacks confidence, John always encourages her warmly. I've always lived with my parents, so I'm not used to making even simple dishes like beef stew. Do you think my seasoning is okay?
For a beginner, it's pretty good. It's tasty, Betty.
John, who barely speaks to me, would talk to Betty in such a sweet tone.
I used to live off campus during my college days, so I'm actually good at cooking. I'll show you how next time we have a day off. Really? I can't wait for your cooking lesson, John.
With a big smile, Betty replied, and John seemed absolutely thrilled. He never cooked a day in his life since we got married. Ever since Betty moved in, John has been coming home from work much earlier. He often brings home desserts and gifts she'd like. Seeing them like this, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. On the other hand, Terry didn't seem to notice anything and acted quite indifferent even in front of Betty and John. As time went on, not only John but also Betty's behavior started to change. While she acted all sweet and helpless in front of John, she started to show a colder attitude towards me when we were alone. One evening, when it was just the two of us, I went to take a shower before Betty.
Betty, I'm done with the shower. It's all yours.
I forgot I'd already told her once, so I accidentally repeated myself after a while. I get it, you don't have to tell me twice. Betty snapped at me. I was taken aback. Sure, it was my mistake for saying it twice. But she didn't have to be that harsh. She was never like this when she first got married. From that point on, I became a bit wary of Betty. Maybe she sensed how I felt about her. She started acting more and more condescending towards me day by day. I've ended up taking on more of the household chores than before. Meanwhile, Betty just sits on the couch, constantly on her phone. I felt frustrated, but had no one to confide in. John really likes Betty, and Terry would definitely see me as an enemy if I spoke ill of his wife Betty. Then, on a certain day off, John was eager to teach Betty how to make dumplings. Seeing John in such a good mood, I wanted to complain a bit.
You've never made dumplings before, have you?
Even when I said that, John just replied, "Quit nagging," and brushed me off.
Well, let's start with getting the ingredients. Betty, ready to go? Yes. Thank you.
Betty answered with a big smile. John and Betty, chatting and laughing, happily got in the car and drove off.
John and Betty, they've been getting along really well lately, haven't they?
I tried striking up a conversation with Terry.
Yeah. I mean, I'd rather they get along than not. It's better for me.
Terry replied, while glancing at his phone. He didn't seem to feel any particular way about it. About 2 hours passed. The two of them returned from shopping. It sure took them a long time considering they just went to the local supermarket. I thought to myself. According to Betty, they took a break at a cafe during their shopping trip. Looking at John, he awkwardly avoided my gaze. The two of them seemed to enjoy making dumplings afterward. Betty was so close to John that she almost leaned on his shoulder. Every so often, Betty would touch John. John seemed completely smitten with Betty. Eventually, the dumplings were ready, and we all sat down to eat. Sorry, I don't feel so good. I'll pass. You guys enjoy. Saying this, I went to my bedroom and collapsed on the bed. I just couldn't muster an appetite. I hate to admit it, but I feel like I'm losing it out of jealousy. John and Betty are acting all lovey-dovey like newlyweds. I don't even feel like eating the food they made. I can tell that Betty is getting all cuddly with John just to spite me. Call it a woman's intuition, I guess. She understands that if she has both John and Terry on her side, she can have a higher position in this household than me. Like this, I slowly started losing my place at home. Living with my eldest son and his wife began as a way to save on rent. I suddenly thought. Even though Betty is married, she doesn't have any kids yet. She's still young. If she wants to save money, why doesn't she go out and work? If Terry can't get overtime and earns less, why doesn't Betty work too? Even in my 50s, I'm working part-time, but Betty stays home all day. Seems like she just lounges around, watching TV shows she's recorded or on her smartphone. One day, I asked Betty in the flow of a conversation.
Don't you want to work or something? Huh?
Betty went silent, seeming taken aback. Immediately, John jumped to her defense.
Hey, you don't need to say unnecessary things. It's enough for Betty just to be at home.
John scolded me.
Well, if Betty wants to work, she can, but if she wants to stay home, she doesn't have to push herself.
Terry just gave his usual non-committal opinion. With both of them supporting her, Betty had a smug look on her face. I couldn't say anything more. Then after some time, I got a call from Betty at my part-time job.
Patricia, something terrible has happened. Terry had an accident at work and was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. What?
I informed my workplace of the situation and rushed to the hospital. Terry was in the intensive care unit, looking nothing like himself. He was delivering products to a client in a company car. While on his way, a truck driver from the opposite side got distracted, crossed the median divider, and collided head-on with Terry's car. The other driver got away with minor injuries, but Terry was in a critical condition, unconscious. Despite the doctor's best efforts, Terry never made it back. I couldn't believe that Terry passed away before me. The sudden turn of events was too much to believe. I spent the night crying by his side. Betty looked deeply shocked as well. John stayed by Betty's side, comforting her more than me. With no time to mourn properly, we had to start preparations for Terry's funeral. Usually, the main mourner should have been Betty, but she said, I have no idea how to handle a funeral, and didn't make any effort.
You've got experience. Help her out.
John instructed me. So, I ended up handling all the arrangements and expenses for the funeral. On the day of the funeral, suddenly, Betty got up from her seat and left. Maybe she rushed to the restroom, overwhelmed by tears. Then, perhaps concerned about Betty, John also left as if following her. Time passed and there was no sign of their return. I thought about going out to check on them. However, with obligations to greet other attendees, I couldn't just leave my seat. But they sure are taking their time. I pulled out my smartphone, thinking about calling John. Checking the screen, I noticed a notification from my pet camera app. I was gonna be out all day, so I turned on my pet camera. When my dog, Carl, stays home alone, I keep him in the bedroom. The camera captures the entire room and I can see everything through the app on my phone. I wonder if Carl is okay. Since the morning chaos, I hadn't fed him. I didn't even take him for his morning walk. I opened the app to check on Carl in the bedroom. Despite being in the middle of a funeral, I almost screamed. Lucy was caged, barking as if he wanted out. Beside the cage, a man and woman were lying on the bed. I immediately stood up and rushed to the restroom with my phone. Taking a deep breath, I looked at the screen again. It was John and Betty on the bed. They were embracing each other, still in their funeral attire. My mind was spinning. Betty, who had left her seat crying, and John, who seemingly followed her. Why are they in our bedroom? But then again, the funeral venue is just a 5-minute drive from my house. It's not entirely impossible. I stepped outside to check the parking lot. John's car was nowhere to be seen. It seemed they had indeed driven to the house. I locked myself in the restroom again and checked the camera. Carl had stopped barking and I could hear the two talking. John tenderly wiped away Betty's tears, touching her face. Surprisingly, Betty was smiling in response. You really are lovely, Betty. Truly beautiful. John showered her with compliments. Really? That's so sweet of you. Betty seemed genuinely pleased. She had been crying at Terry's funeral just moments ago. You're the ideal woman for me. If I didn't have a wife, I'd want you as mine. John seemed like he was proposing to Betty. No. You can't. Betty showed a bit of resistance, but was also clearly drawn to John. You do remind me of someone, Betty. So much resemblance. Hearing this, I was in shock. John and Betty continued their intimacy on the bed. I couldn't watch any longer. I closed the app. I'm feeling disgusted and not wanting to see any more. When I finally left the restroom in a daze, I managed to get back to my seat. After a while, John and Betty returned to the funeral venue together. Both looked somewhat downcast. Betty's hair was a bit disheveled. To those around, it might have just seemed like a devastated wife, Patricia, breaking down in tears and a kind father-in-law, comforting her. However, knowing the truth, I was boiling inside. But all I want right now is to get through Terry's funeral. Trying to suppress my anger, I held it together. After the funeral, we finally headed home. John and Betty were seated on the living room couch. I immediately went to the bedroom to get our dog, Carl. Carl, sorry for keeping you locked in the bedroom all day. As soon as I did, Carl bolted out of his cage. He wagged his tail happily at me and then darted into the living room. Hey, what's gotten into you? Ignoring John's attempts to calm him, Carl made a beeline for Betty's feet. What the heck? Even as Betty shrank back, Carl jumped up at her, barking. The force knocked Betty to the floor. I was stunned by Carl's behavior. He seemed furious with the two of them. Thinking back, I remembered seeing on our pet camera that Carl had been locked inside a cage in the bedroom. That cage was from when Carl was a puppy, and we hardly use it anymore. Because he hates it. John and Betty probably caged him because he'd be in the way when they got intimate. I'm sure they ignored Carl's barking. They might have let him out when they left the room, but Carl must have been upset with them for confining him in that tight space. Hey, Carl, calm down, I'm gonna feed you now, John tried to pacify him. But Carl, showing no interest, bit at John's foot. Carl doesn't particularly like John or Betty, who never take care of him. He probably can't forgive them for locking him in the cage he detests. Ouch! Hey, stop that! Don't come near me! What's with this dog? Is he out of his mind? Betty exclaimed, frightened, as Carl growled and lunged at her feet. I'm the only one who takes care of Carl. Feeding, walking, everything. So, he loves me the most. It seemed like he understood how John and Betty were hurting me and was attacking them on my behalf. Carl was standing up for me. This gave me the push I needed. I had saved all the footage from today's pet camera. Perfect evidence of their affair. I wondered if I could use this somehow. I thought about it for a while. After some time passed, we decided to hold Terry's memorial service at our house. For the service, not only our family and relatives, but also Betty's parents are planning to come. For me, this is a golden opportunity. Everyone gathered in our living room, where the memorial service took place. Afterwards, everyone started chatting loudly around the catered food. When everyone had finished eating, I stood up and began to speak. Thank you all for coming today for Terry's memorial service.
I have something I'd like all of you to see today.
Everyone became silent and focused on me. John and Betty looked stunned as I was bringing up something unexpected. I closed the shutters of the living room and turned off the lights. Even though it was daytime, the room went pitch dark. I pressed the remote for the projector I had prepared in advance. This projector was something John had bought a while ago, saying, "It's like watching movies at home." Although, he hadn't used it much recently. On the wall of the dim room, a large video started playing. It showed John and Betty on a bed, flirting in funeral attire. Thanks to the projector, they were almost life-sized. Their intimate interaction was broadcasted loudly. "Hey, what the hell is this?"
Wait, what's going on? Why?
John and Betty were completely shocked. They were panicking. The audience started murmuring things like, "Oh my God. What's this?" and "Seriously." John and Betty, in their distress, stood up trying to block the screen from view.
Both of you, sit down. You're in the way.
I shouted at them loudly. The video continued to show their passionate embrace.
Betty, this can't be real. What is this about?
Betty's parents stared at her with a twisted expression.
Ladies and gentlemen, this footage was captured by a pet camera I had set up in our bedroom.
Hearing this, John muttered, "Damn it." He probably had forgotten about the camera there.
If you look at the date and time at the bottom of the screen, these two snuck out of Terry's funeral service, drove back, and did this in our bedroom.
Hearing this, everyone gasped and exclaimed, "No way," and "I can't believe it."
Hold on, there's a reason for this. I was really sad about Terry's death and was crying. John came to comfort me, and it kinda just happened.
At that moment, the video reached a scene where she said, "I've actually liked you for a while," to John. I paused the video at that point.
Did you hear that, everyone? Not only my husband, but it seems Betty was pretty into it too.
Betty's face turned bright red from embarrassment. I pressed the play button again.
While Terry's death was shocking, I always felt something was missing. I actually prefer men who shower me with compliments. So maybe, I prefer you over Terry.
Betty's voice played loudly, and everyone glared at her.
There are such terrible women in this world. Ugh, it's sickening.
I said, shuddering.
Betty, I never knew you could stoop so low. It's truly pitiful. That's right. I can't believe she's our daughter. What an embarrassment.
Betty was scolded by her parents and broke down in tears. Then, John's voice could be heard from the video.
You are truly the ideal woman. If I didn't have a wife, I'd want you as mine.
Seems I'm just in the way for my husband. There's nothing sadder than that. Everyone gave John disapproving looks, and he cast his gaze downward in shame.
I feel so bad for Patricia. Who knew John was such a terrible person?
John received cold stares from all the women present and was sweating profusely. Then John's voice was heard again from the video.
You really does resemble my first love.
I pressed the pause button again.
Everyone, Betty looks just like my husband's first love. But that's no excuse for him to make a move on his son's wife.
John's face turned pale.
I know about my husband's first love. We were high school classmates. I had a friend who had an older sister named Sophia. That Sophia was my husband's first crush. Well, it was just a one-sided love though.
John looked embarrassed as I revealed his past. I paused the video and displayed a photo on the screen.
This is my husband's first love.
The screen displayed a graduation photo of a young girl. A girl with neat braids. It was Sophia from her high school days. Upon close examination, there was a certain resemblance to Betty.
And guess what? We have Sophia here with us today. Please welcome Sophia. What?
John was so shocked that he couldn't close his open mouth. I turned on the lights, and the room brightened instantly. Suddenly, a middle-aged woman energetically entered the room. This was Sophia, John's first love. I knew Sophia's younger sister and had her contact, so after explaining the situation, Sophia said she'd love to meet John.
Hey, long time no see. John, how've you been?
As she said this in a loud voice, the large woman stood before John. The current Sophia was quite plump, reminiscent of a female wrestler. She looked nothing like she did in high school. Her voice was hoarse, probably from drinking. John was frozen in shock.
Sophia. You mean you liked me that much, John? I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me?
Sophia, now a bold character, made a grand entrance and left John dumbfounded.
You made a move on your son's wife just because she looks like me. John, that's just not right.
Sophia said this and playfully slapped John's shirt. He staggered from the impact.
Hey, I'm divorced and single. I run a bar now. Why not join me?
John was forcibly hugged and swayed by Sophia.
No, I'm married, you know. But Patricia already gave me the green light. She said she'd hand you over any time.
Hearing this, John looked at me. While looking at Sophia, I nodded in agreement and said, exactly. I feel like throwing out this husband of mine right now. If anyone wants him, feel free to pick him up. Just then, Betty, who had been silently watching, suddenly spoke up.
Wait a minute. John, aren't you being a bit harsh? How do you think I resemble this hefty woman? What? No, she used to be really cute back in the day. Never thought she'd change so much.
When John said this, Sophia hugged him tightly again and said, Excuse me? It's rude to talk about someone like they're some kind of monster. We're both divorcees, right? Let's try to get along. By the way, I've been looking for a new man. You'll do, John, won't you? John could only shake his head in refusal.
I don't look anything like her.
Betty was fuming.
Shut it. You're making a scene.
Betty was scolded by her parents. The reunion became total chaos. John and Betty were shunned by the family and promised not to have any more dealings with them in the future. After that, I kicked both John and Betty out of the house. I divorced John and sued both of them for the mental suffering they caused me. Betty's feelings for John cooled down, and she started to resent him. Their relationship deteriorated quickly. Having been abandoned by her family, Betty wandered aimlessly. Being unemployed, Betty found herself suddenly living alone and applied for various jobs. But she couldn't get a good job as her interviews didn't go well. Now, she's working multiple part-time jobs day and night, living alone in a rundown apartment. As for John, his affair with his son's wife became public at his company. Due to the damage to his reputation and the loss of trust, he got fired. Now, he's just scraping by, doing manual labor part-time jobs. Moreover, John has been getting constant invitations from Sophia. The constant pestering is mentally wearing him out. Even though John was married to me, he always had a soft spot for Sophia since high school. But this unexpected reunion turned those sweet memories into a nightmare. As for me, without the stress of having John and Betty around, I'm living peacefully by myself. I can't help but feel sorry when I think about Terry. But if I keep being down about it, Terry won't be happy either. I've continued my part-time job and started a home garden, making sure to stay active. And, most importantly, I have my buddy, Carl. Going for walks with Carl is the happiest time of my day. I hope to continue living fulfilling days in this house.